All right, we're going to get started here. Welcome, everybody, to the the January 4th, 2024 meeting of the Salt Lake City Historic Landmark Commission. I'm John Iwanowski. I'm the vice chair, but I'll be acting as chair tonight with Babs DeLay. Our regular chair is excused on vacation. So starting with attendance, we have me, John Iwanowski is here, Adrian White is here, Jared Stewart is here, Alan Barnett present, Mike Vella present, Carlton is here, and Amanda is here, and Emily Kearns is here. Michael Abramson is also excused on vacation. So we have 8 commissioners, and we have a quorum. Approval of last meeting's minutes. We did not meet in December, but the November meeting minutes were posted on Dropbox. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review those, and I would entertain a motion. You gotta turn your mic on.
I'll make a motion that the November minutes be approved.
I second that motion.
So Mike made the motion and Emily seconded it. Let's do a roll call vote. Adrian?
Aye.
Jared?
Aye.
Alan? Aye. Mike? Carlton?
Aye.
Amanda?
Aye.
Emily?
Aye.
And I am also an aye. So the meeting minutes from November 2023 are approved. Report of the chair and vice chair. Babs is not here, obviously. I wanted to see. I'm trying to go paperless, and now I'm just like lost. Our community lost a couple people in the last quarter of 2023. So I just wanted to recognize a couple guys. The first was Stephen Pace, who passed away on September 21st. Steve was the driving force between the zoning text amendment to allow for the reconstruction of carriage houses on contributing sites, which he championed as a way to rebuild the carriage house of the Richard Cletting designed beer house in the Avenues district where he lived for a long time. Coincidentally, we'll be kind of tangentially discussing that reconstruction amendment during tonight's agenda. I had the pleasure of knowing Stephen for a couple of years before he passed, and he was a firecracker. He was a really cool guy who had a lot of passion for preservation. So, secondly, Robert Pett passed away unexpectedly on October 31st. Rob was a preservation architect who served as the president of MJSA for 25 years before retiring in 2018. He was the architect behind the Kearns Mansion restoration following the fire there, the Keith Mansion restoration, and the Utah State Capitol Green Gold Room restoration, among many other projects. So, our condolences to their families. Report of the director. Amy.
Yes, I have a couple things that I wanted to announce tonight. One of them is very exciting. The ordinance for the H overlay changes has been adopted by council, and it was published on December 6th, 2023. For those of you that are new on the commission and those of you that were on the commission when it was brought forward, just for a refresher of what that ordinance entails, it was a lot of reorganization. And then we also added in a number of new things, one of those being the ability to deny a certificate of appropriateness at a staff level. And that was a time-saving measure for the Landmark Commission. So enforcement cases and things that are very straightforward can now be decided on an administrative level where before they had to be brought to the commission for consideration. It also allows the approval of all solar panels at a staff level. This was also a suggestion from the Landmark Commission at the time in regards to sustainability efforts and not really wanting to see those solar panels that could be removed. And then we added in a new process for considering updates to historic resource surveys. And then we also looked at factors to consider for historic status determination. So all of those things are now codified. I did put the ordinance in your Dropbox for reference if anyone's interested in looking through those changes that have been adopted. And then the second thing I wanted to update on was the 3 local historic district applications that we have. So there's 2 that have been to this commission as well as the Planning Commission for a recommendation, and that's the Laird Heights and the Princeton Heights. Both of those went through the public opinion ballot process, and both of the results of that ballot ended up being in favor, the majority of the property owners in favor of the district. And so from there, those 2 are being transmitted to council, and it'll be on a council agenda for a future date, and the council will make a decision on those. And then there's a 3rd district that has been submitted for Upper Yell, and that one has just, it's in the initial stages there. The city council accepted the director's report for that item in December. And so that'll move forward through the public process with property owner meetings and open houses, and then we'll come to you all as well as Planning Commission here in the near future. And that is all I have.
Amy,
you,
could you repeat
Amy.
the name of the first proposed historic districts?
Yes, the first 2 that you've seen that have gone through the balloting process and are now getting ready to be transmitted to council are the Princeton Heights and the Laird Heights. And the one that is in process that you have not seen yet but will be here shortly is Upper Yale.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have public comments. The commission will hear public comments not pertaining to items listed on the agenda. I do not have any comment cards, and I, as far as we know, do not have any members of the public wishing to speak at this time. With that, we can move into our agenda. Our first and only public hearing of the evening is a zoning text amendment for enforcement on work done without a certificate of appropriateness. This is case number PLN PCM 2023-00336, and we have Mayara Lima with the Planning Department here to present that. Take it away.
Okay, so we had a briefing in November about this. I'll try to just highlight the portions that changed since then and what we're proposing. So I'll just jump right in. To give you a little overview, this is a city-initiated text amendment, and the intent here is to address the unlawful construction and demolition activities in local historic districts and landmark sites. This text amendment will impact properties in the historic overlay, and on the image there on the slide, you will see our current local historic districts that might change with the new districts being proposed. So it will apply to those as well. And it also applies to landmark sites, which is not included in this map. We talked a little bit about in the briefing that these structures in historic districts, especially the contributing structures, their loss is irreversible, and there is a value that cannot be recovered once damage is done to the property, especially demolition. So we want to treat them a little bit different in terms of enforcement, different from our regular zoning and building code enforcement. We don't think that the tools available are effective to address the uniqueness of historic preservation. And we also acknowledge that there's a lot of development pressure in our historic districts. given the location, the value of land, and all of those. So the objective of this proposal is to create a robust process to address the unauthorized demolition in the local historic district, hopefully to prevent and counter violations, and to provide a clear and consistent message to our city regarding historic preservation. So the proposed change, and bear with me, it's a lot of text here, but it's a text amendment, so we kind of have to deal with it. The changes that we're proposing include an enforcement subsection within the historic overlay chapter, which is 21.834.020. We have a zoning enforcement chapter within the city code, and that's 21.820. This subsection will reference that one and will add additional measurements that we could apply for historic overlay. That is in, if you want to follow, in attachment A, page 18 of the staff report. And in that subsection, we would be directing to 21.820, and these remedies that I mentioned are additional, include the requirement to undo work that cannot be approved. And it's something that we currently do. It's now written in code, or would be written in code. And provisions related to demolition and irreversible work that permanently damages the building and compromises the historic status. I will go over those in a little bit. Second, we'll be prohibiting the redevelopment of a property when the principal building is demolished without a COA, unless the proposal is for reconstruction. So the idea is, once we know of a violation, we'll issue a certificate of non-compliance that will be recorded against the property to give notice to future property owners to make it harder to refinance or to sell the property. That will push the owner into coming into compliance. And that certificate will state that the property cannot be redeveloped for 25 years unless they reconstruct the structure. With that, then, we have to establish the process for reconstruction. So that's number 3 there. We already have the reconstruction for a carriage house. So we're combining those two. They follow similar standards. They follow the National Park Service guidelines. So we're combining those two to create that process in case of a demolition without a COA. Within that process, we also have a restrictive covenant that the property owner will be required to sign. And in that covenant, the reconstructed building will not be allowed to be demolished for 25 years, and no other major alterations to the exterior of the building would be allowed. So we want them to reconstruct and maintain it. Let's see my notes here, sorry. Okay, then we'll also adding a provision that will prohibit a property owner from requesting a change of status based on a violation. That is also included in the enforcement subsection, and it prevents someone from doing work without approval that could compromise the historic status of the building, and then them coming to the city and requesting administrative change of that status, or change of status through the administrative process. In this provision, we'll be required to reject such request, and a change of status would be only possible through the updating of a survey, which then has to be adopted by City Council. So it's a longer step. And even so, through the City Council, we could still justify that a change of status is not warranted because it's of a violation. So another layer to make it harder and try to prevent those violations from happening. We're also going to clarify the eligibility for economic hardship. And in this case, we'll clarify that self-imposed conditions are not eligible for demolition due to economic hardship. Self-imposed conditions being demolition without approval or other work that was not authorized. And then just minimal changes to other code sections just to make sure everything is tied up and we can accomplish the reconstruction, specifically in allowing a non-complying structure and a non-conforming use to be restored. So, the key considerations in your staff reports include the enforcement limitations that we have today, the research of other tools, city goals and policies, and the feedback received during the briefings, both from this commission and planning commission. I'm gonna go over the first three really quick because we already talked about that in the briefings. The enforcement limitations include our tools are not suited for addressing a demolition of a building that the historic value cannot be recreated, right? We can recreate the building, but we can't get back the cultural value, the craftsmanship, the original materials. So in terms of enforcement, the tools that we have are not tailored to our need. We can require the reconstruction when there's something left, but once it's gone, right now we don't have tools, and it puts the city in a difficult situation where we either send them through a process that doesn't have an outcome, or we have to let it go easy and let the applicant move on with new construction without much of a consequence. The research of other tools, we found that other cities that have fines and reconstruction process, what they're aiming to accomplish is to prevent greater development potential, by restricting the future redevelopment of the property. In terms of reconstruction that some cities do, the idea is to incur an additional cost and potentially creating an unfavorable outcome, so that will prevent them from doing it in the first place. We have examples from Denver, Pasadena, Philadelphia, New Orleans, and this one in particular on the slide is Boise, where they were denied demolition after effectively demolishing a historic building, and they had to reconstruct it. In terms of city goals and policies, this proposal meets the community preservation plan, the Plan Salt Lake, and some of the neighborhood plans that include historic districts in their area. And the proposal provides a wider range of preservation tools. It helps us in the enforcement of regulations and approvals, and ensure that our regulations can be enforced. Plan Salt Lake and our neighborhood plans include a lot of guiding principles and goals regarding preservation, and those are in line with this proposal as well. In terms of the feedback we received from HLC and PC, on I think pages 8 and 9 of the staff report, you will find an answer to some of those questions. The one I wanted to highlight in the presentation today is both HLC and PC asked if this was an issue for Salt Lake City and if we had examples of that. And I included 2 that were in our historic districts because it does happen. So the first one is in the Avenues. It happened in 2006, 2007. We issued a COA for remodel of the building, and when they were doing exploratory demolition in the interior of the building, they removed a structure, a column that was structural to the building, and it compromised the building. Fortunately, some of it was left. If you go to Google Street View during that time, you probably won't recognize the building, but it's just the first floor there was left. But we were able to reconstruct the roof of the building. The second one happened 2021, and it was a demolition without a permit and without a COA. Luckily, it was a non-contributing building, so we would have approved it anyway, but it didn't go through the process. A building or a demolition permit is required to ensure that the building is safe to be demolished. You know, the inspector goes out and makes sure that the gas lines are capped, the water lines are capped. In this case, they didn't pursue that permit, and they didn't pursue the COA. In the case of the COA, it could have been issued within less than 30 days. It's a pretty straightforward process, but yeah, so that didn't happen. Just to kind of show you where we are in the process, in the public process that we went through, we sent out notices starting in October. We held open houses for this process, and we sent out notices for this hearing as well as the briefings. The briefings were held both with HLC and Planning Commission in November, and now we're stepping into the hearings. You guys are the first ones. Next week, we're presenting to Planning Commission for the recommendation, because this is a proposal related or involving your authority and the area that you oversee. We're asking for a recommendation, as well as the Planning Commission, and we'll take that recommendation to City Council. We have, in terms of public comments, a letter from the Sugar House Community Council that was added to the staff report. Cindy Cromer actually sent me some email right before this meeting, but I'll let her speak for herself. But yeah, that is the public process that we went through. Sorry, I didn't have a slide for that recommendation, but the recommendation is that you forward a positive recommendation to City Council, and that is it for my hearing. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mayara. Any questions, commissioners?
I wonder if you could just tell me, does this address in any way the issue of demolition by neglect?
It doesn't. We do have a request to work on willful neglect. I do think that the provision added to the economic hardship of self-imposed condition will set a foundation for that, but it's something we still need to address in our ordinance. It's coming.
Thank you.
I think I have a question in that so much of what I read is kind of, these are reactions to something that's happened. You know, there's a demolition permit that's required. Sometimes it doesn't get taken, and then it's discovered that a building is being partially demolished or fully demolished, and so it's all after the fact. Was there any consideration of at least for the historic zoning areas for greater scrutiny of work before it starts? I mean, you know, there's a process where, you know, you're supposed to get a construction permit, a demolition permit, and you know, if that happens, great. Then the contractors know what they can and cannot do. But it just seems like everything that's here is after the fact, and it's hard to fix after the fact. Was there any consideration of greater participation before these happen? So, and I guess what I'm thinking is that, you know, looking at the boundaries of Capitol Hill and the avenues in Central City and such, is there a greater policing kind of thing where you know, someone is looking to make certain that any kind of construction, you know, it does have a permit?
So when they request a permit, whether that's for demolition or for construction remodeling, they call in for an inspection when they're ready for that. And the inspector is able to tell if the, you know, project is exceeding the scope of work or if it needs additional permit, all of that. It's hard for us, it's hard for us to know what everything that's happening in the city, so we do rely on citizens to report anything that doesn't have a permit, and that's why sometimes it gets to the point of being after the fact, is at what point did we receive that complaint, and at what point did we go out and check for the violation? So we don't have a team to just go around the city and check if things are permitted or not, if that makes sense.
Just to follow up on what Myra said, I think the city doesn't have the capacity to do that either. Not only do we not have a team, but we don't have the capacity to put a team like that together. Part of these changes that we were looking at doing was a deterrent to make sure that that doesn't happen. So right now, not really anything in place. So it does happen after the fact. Unlike other cities that have created these ordinances in response to big major things that have happened, whether it be, a landmark site or a couple houses that are contributing that have been torn down, we're trying to get on, the forefront of that and get this in place before something like that happens here. We're hoping that these changes will in turn deter someone from even attempting to do the work now that these requirements for reconstruction and penalties are clearly laid out in the ordinance.
Thank you. I understand what you're saying. I'm just wondering if, on the public side, if there was a posting of the construction or a posting of the demolition, so that neighbors would know, they've gotten that. There's a posting of that document that says that this is the kind of work that's going to be done, either demolition or new construction. And if they're not, then I think our greatest help would be that neighbors are not seeing that posting, and then they would ask. But right now, I mean, for everything that you're saying, if people are going through the process, I think the process works. What this is trying to catch is for the people who aren't following the process. There's no posting, there's no documentation, and they just start demolishing, and then they get caught. And then this takes care of when they get caught. I was just trying to think if there's something earlier that could be done. I understand what you're saying about capacity. How many people would it take to police this, on a fairly regular basis, and just drive around every one of these on a monthly basis?
I don't have the answer to that. It would be someone within the civil enforcement division, but I don't think that that's something that we would have the capacity to put together. I don't really know.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to say a lot, but I don't actually know. I think, I also suspect that most of the violations wouldn't actually be a demolition overnight. I think a lot of the demolitions we would probably be addressing here is the demolitions like the Avenues case, where someone is doing work and they went too far. And that's why contractors have a license. They should know what they're doing, and they should not be doing that. So I think it's a team, right? Not just the city team. It's, contractors, architects, developers, they're all part of that. And, they're qualified to do the work that they got a license for.
I had a comment. It's about consideration 4, which is regarding the feedback from the commissions. Point 3 on page 9, if anyone wants to look at it. So it's essentially talking about, the restrictive covenant and the amount of time that building is then protected, and it's chosen as a 25-year mark. And I know I mentioned this in the briefing in November, and I think 50 years would be appropriate. I know in our last meeting, Carlton even said, I don't know if it was a joke or offhand, but the amount of time that building was standing. So if a building is 104 years old, then it could be protected for another 104 years. As a preservationist, I think that 25 years is not adequate. I think 50 would be more appropriate. And so I think that that's just something that I think needs to be considered by us before we approve.
I agree that 50 is a more appropriate number, especially since if it was already a designated historical property, then after 50 years, it would be a bona fide historical property. I'd like to see that increase too.
Any other questions?
You know, on that, I have a thought on that 25 years. I don't know if I agree, actually. I think I'm thinking from the perspective of a property owner. If I had a restrictive covenant imposed on me, 25 years does seem long enough that I would say, oh, okay, I need to either reconstruct this or, you know, this isn't worth demolishing. I think it does accomplish the purpose and the intent of deterring the demolition, I guess I think 25 years might do that. And that seems to be the intent, is to deter. I don't know. It's just my 2 cents, but I'm not sure. Just trying to get in the head of, okay, what's the intent of this to deter the demolition, right?
I think people will bank land for generations, and so it should be a considerable deterrent. And 50 years is a kind of a generational hardship.
Let's discuss this during the executive session for this and keep this to questions for my
Can I just interject something? When you're discussing that 25 years, can you include also the prohibition on redevelopment of the property and figure out if that includes that as well? Thank you.
Along those same lines, so yeah, the prohibition on redevelopment, does that mean that there's a possibility, as it's currently set up or proposed, that a property where somebody demolished a historic building could potentially be then undevelopable for 25 years? We could have a vacant lot for 25 years?
Yes, that is the intent. I wouldn't call it undevelopable because they could redevelop with the reconstruction, but yeah, they wouldn't be able to build anything else for 25 years.
So there is the possibility there would be a vacant lot?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and part of the intent of that, kind of along with that, is that all the height restrictions, other zoning restrictions would be waived, basically, is what I got from your presentation. So, like non-conforming uses, all that, they'd be allowed if you reconstruct the building.
Yes.
So, in other words, you could redevelop it, but only if it was exactly the same. Yeah. That wasn't really a question. I was going to piggyback off Alan's question earlier now I got to find it again. It says text amendment. So this is talking about boarded buildings and willful neglect. Text amendment PLN PCM 2023-00868 initiated by the Building Services Division is proposing to increase that. So I'm just wondering where that is at in the process of consideration.
We have a tentative schedule to go to Planning Commission on the 24th. The second, I don't know if it's 24th, the second hearing of January. I'm not sure if they're ready for a public hearing, but that's the plan for building services.
Any more questions? Hearing none, we will open the public hearing. I have a comment card from someone named Cindy Cromer. 2 minutes.
I may not get through all of this in 2 minutes. If that's the case, I will ask Laura to send you the comments through the Dropbox. I'm not opposed to this proposal. Boy, it's loud. As part of a much larger set of changes regarding the maintenance of the city's historic district, the short version of this is that this proposal is not enough. It's not nearly enough. I'm going to look at the Central City Historic District and talk about how it is different from the other districts in terms of this proposal. First of all, there are more inaccuracies in the survey in the Central City Historic District. The zoning, especially along the tracks corridor, is inconsistent with preservation. The vast majority of residents are renters unfamiliar with the regulations. Properties are changing ownership so quickly that the city's new notification to owners is less effective, and buildings have a history of poor maintenance promoting parcel and total demolition. Additionally, citywide, complaint only does not work. It simply does not work. Staff does from time to time issue permits inappropriately. Different departments are involved in enforcement and they operate in silos. And I could go on and on about why they do that. There is inadequate emphasis on the streetscape in the ordinance. It's built into the ordinance. So what we need in addition to this proposal, and I may run out of time, is data on the outcomes of enforcement, including cases before this commission, increased benefits for owners of contributory structures through density bonuses not linked to the requirements for affordable housing, implementation of transfer of development rights, focus on compatible mass and scale for new construction after examining the relationship between base zoning and overlay zoning, and addressing so-called acts of God, such as fires in vacant buildings. God does not burn historic buildings. Thanks for the extra time if I needed it.
Thanks, Cindy. No other comment cards, and I do not see anyone else wishing to speak. I don't know if there's any other public comments that came through late or anything like
We
that.
don't have any emails either.
Okay. Great. So I will close the public hearing. I don't know if there's anything you would like to say in response to the public comments. Okay. Thank you, Mayara. And we will open the executive session to discuss as commissioners. Emily, do you want to start? We can start with kind of where you were headed.
I felt like we covered we have different feelings about this 50-year situation. I do feel like that's worthy of debate. I like 50, but it is a steep penalty, really strict. And although it's contrary, I do feel some remorse for people who are who've made terrible mistakes on their house, on their homes, and I do think that I don't need a lot of gray area on this. I don't think a little demolition versus a whole demolition needs to be distinguished. I like the bill as it stands. But I do think that a lot of this seems like it's trying to encourage garage housing or accessory dwellings. Is that part of this? Right. I mean, so I don't see, there's so much carriage house in here. Is that for the community's development goals or because carriage houses are a serious problem?
So the carriage house, or you mean the draft ordinance?
Mm-hmm.
So the carriage house, the reconstruction for carriage house was a recently adopted text that we have there. And the standards are very similar to what we were proposing for the reconstruction after demolition. That's why we put it together. There's no other reason other than a private petition put that there.
Thank you.
I don't know if we want to talk more about the 25-year versus 50-year. I think I try to start to think about, okay, who is demolishing these, right? If that were to happen, I could see a couple different scenarios. One, maybe a homeowner just doesn't even realize and tear it down, and that's kind of an unsophisticated accidental demolition or unsophisticated developer, I suppose, right? Then there's like maybe a more sophisticated developer who's planning to put up townhomes or condos or something larger, and they should kind of that I would have a hard time believing that would be accidental, right? So that type of developer who would demolish it, I don't think is trying to land bank, or I would feel like is unlikely to land bank something for 25 years. Emily, maybe you would agree. I don't know if we'd agree on that, but I think it does meet the intent of the text amendment to deter some of that. I don't know. That's my thoughts. Open for discussion and open to have my mind changed too.
Yeah, I understand. I think 25 years is good for the intent of deterring. For me, 50 years is more appropriate as like an homage to the building, because as someone who is on the Sugar House Community Council, there is a developer who's at almost every meeting. He developed the area in Sugar House where Whole Foods and Barnes & Noble and all of those buildings are. He did that. And he said, it's 25 years old, ready to tear it down and do something new. And so 25 years is also a short enough amount of time for a developer to bank on a property multiple times. He doesn't see it as valuable after 25 years because it's not historic yet. So that's kind of an example of why I think 25 is not adequate. I think that from like a true preservation perspective, we need more time for it to really age and for people to appreciate the buildings rather than hitting that 25-year mark and saying, okay, we waited it out, we're gonna demolish it, we're gonna make more money and build something new.
Yeah, I would weigh in. I was not joking when I made my remark about the age of the building, although that would be, I think, an extreme case, obviously. But I think that to some degree recognizes that, not to say that more recent buildings are less historically valuable than older ones, but certainly there are fewer of the older ones, and to the extent that you're taking down something that has that historical legacy for the city, the consequences should be commensurate with the loss. I tend to agree that, in my view, 25 years is too short. One, because developers have an extremely long time horizon. And the reality, too, is that if you're looking at an historic building, especially the ones that are done not by accident, but by intent, some of the examples that were provided in the last presentation, these are not small buildings. They're commercial properties in the center of urban districts, and that land has value, and that land will retain its value over time. The only thing that the development prohibition creates is a loss of revenue. It doesn't have any consequence on the commensurate gain in value over time. And I would not be surprised. In fact, I know developers who have the mindset, not with the intent of destroying something surreptitiously, but they know that land is going to be worth 3 or 4 times as much. And if they're planning on building a 30-story tower in a lot that has a 3-story historic building, cost of business is what it comes down to. We've seen that in Salt Lake. We certainly see it in Washington, D.C., where I started my career in historic preservation, where, especially because of the height restrictions in the district, the land is so valuable that it doesn't matter. They're willing to sit on it for decades at a time before they decide what they're going to do. And in the meantime, the land will continue to appreciate. I'm not sure, from my perspective, that a simple prohibition on development of that land is actually quite enough, because they're still going to get the commensurate value gain over time. I would lean a little more towards requiring redevelopment of a surreptitiously destroyed building, because that imposes an immediate cost and not something where they lose income, but there's an expense that they have to incur going forward. There's an aspect of it that I don't particularly like, because then we're mandating recreation of historic buildings, which kind of goes against some of the other standards that we have for development in historic districts. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. But I do think that it's important to realize and understand that the cost that we're imposing is a use cost. It's not any sort of cost or impairment of the long-term value of the property that they still retain. So.
Other thoughts?
My first thought when you proposed the 50 years versus 25, I thought, well, that's a long time for a property to be vacant if the owner chooses not to rebuild the facsimile of the original structure. But I like your arguments. They do make sense, and I especially like rebuild it. You tore it down, you rebuild it. I don't know how that plays into the existing proposal. But I do like I like the point made that that this is about money, and how ultimately an owner can wait it out, if you will, to realize that benefit.
I'm new to the commission, so I don't know all the rules, but would it be possible for us, if we all decide that 50 years is appropriate, to approve this under the condition that that time frame is changed?
Yeah, so we're just forwarding a recommendation. So I think we can forward a recommendation as we see fit. We can craft it a little bit. Yeah, I tend to agree, actually, and I wasn't expecting I was going to say this, but 25 years does seem a little short. Like, I could see a scenario where more of a legacy developer, like a large family developer, of which there are a handful in the valley, would demolish like a derelict historic building, and then, you know, they know that that land's going to be in the family for as long as they want it to be, and their children would, or their benefactors could potentially enrich themselves with that too. So, something to keep in mind. Yeah. 25 years would be like a normal permanent loan on a development property. The terms are usually 10 years, at which point you refinance or sell or do something with it. But a lot of times those larger developers will hold on to property past that as kind of an income cash stream. So.
Yeah, and I would add that I can think of various properties in the city, not that have been demolished as historic properties, where those properties have been in the family or owned by the family company for generations. I think the location where the new Astra Tower was going was owned by the D Corporation, and they've held that land for well nigh 50 years, I think, before they sold it for development. There are other properties that I know were empty lots for decades that were owned by other prominent families whose names would be recognized, who eventually developed or sold that land. There is a very strong tendency in certain quarters, certainly, to land bank and to retain that property because they know that the value of the underlying property is going to continue to go up regardless of what was or was not there originally.
Yeah, I think historically we've just seen more and more and more development. So I agree with you, Carlton. I think the amount of time is crucial for that aspect, because development is in, and in many ways preservation is not as mainstream as development. We are the champions for these old buildings, and so I think that, you know, I think it's really important that while we're in this role now, we can protect these buildings in the future when we're no longer here to protect them.
Great. Yeah, any other thoughts, questions?
I like this new fine for boarding up a building, that it's gone to, I mean, there's a new fine, and then there's a 10 times increase for the cost of boarding up a building. Sorry, I didn't say that. So how is that enforced? When someone boards up a building, how long is it allowed to be boarded up? Because that is a serious community problem. So once this penalty has been levied, is there any additional penalty? So if you leave these houses sitting derelict for year after year?
I don't know if I know all the answers, but I'll try. This is a kind of a separate amendment. So that will increase, when someone is boarding a building, they have to pay a fine every year. Correct me if I'm wrong. Every year they have to pay a fee because the inspectors are checking on the boarded building. That text amendment will increase the one-time fee and then the annual fee for those boarded buildings. This proposal is not addressing any of these willful neglect unless the building is demolished or there's any modifications without a COA. That doesn't kick in this text amendment. The willful neglect, which is leaving your boarded building without maintenance for several years, is something that we're going to be working on in the future. So I don't know that we can, give you more in terms of this text amendment.
That's good. So if a property owner is levied this fine year after year after year, sooner or later that would eclipse the value of the house. And would that property be, would become city property or state property, or is that how that works? How do these the building that sat on 3rd and 7th East, the big pink house, that was like a heartbreak forever. So who owns that property after so long of neglect? Is there a mechanism that ownership transfers if they're not going to use it?
No, we don't have anything like that in our ordinance. That particular property, I believe, was a fire. I'm not sure, if it's under different ownership now, but just because somebody owns a property, they've, let it sit boarded for however many years, and then it gets a fire in it, the fire doesn't then in turn make the property get owned by the city or somebody else. It's just their property still. It does make way for them to be able to develop it. The fees that are looking to be changed with Title 18 for the boarded buildings, they are fairly substantial, I guess, compared to what they are now, which is pretty minimal. What was it, like $1,000 something a month? And I think they're being changed to it's like $12,000 or $13,000 a year.
I think it's 14, right?
14 a year. And again, that might not be enough, but it's definitely something. That is a separate amendment. That would be all boarded buildings in the city. That doesn't apply to just local historic districts or landmark sites or buildings that are under the purview of this commission. It does definitely lay some foundation for us to start working on the willful neglect stuff that is specific to the historic overlay, but that is not something that we researched as part of this. That was something that was brought up at actually the briefing for the H overlay changes by one of the council members.
Thank you.
How are the boarded buildings tracked? Who records that and determines that a building has been boarded?
So I think they have to apply for a permit to board the building. And then I think the boarded building list, is it real estate services now or building services that tracks it?
Yeah, we have the same way we track building permits and enforcement cases. We have a case number for boarded buildings in our system.
Does the city have a vacant lot fee similar to that?
I don't think so.
No, not that I know of.
I'll throw this out. This occurred to me just when we were having this conversation that I would almost suggest, at least for discussion, that not just the 25 or 50 or however many year development prohibition, but historic buildings in the historic district that are surreptitiously demolished for intent, either are redeveloped to match the original development, or if the owner decides to not redevelop that property, that a similar vacant lot fee would apply to that to impose a cost in that time and encourage redevelopment.
I think that's a great idea. And, you know, it obviously couldn't be any vacant lot because there's some lots that have been vacant forever, right? But it could, if it applied specifically to lots where a historic landmark or
Exactly, yeah.
property had been demolished, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, just I think that's great. And I guess, you know, also, Emily, you were talking about, okay, what happens if to properties that do have willful neglect? I know that if a property owner does not pay their property taxes for, I think, 5 years, it goes up for tax sale potentially, right? So that's, you know, you can still have willful neglect and pay your property taxes. So you'd have to have both of those things really line up to have that happen. But that's very independent of, that's not the city's, that's a county, state code thing more than the city.
At one point in time, I recall the city passed an ordinance, and I don't know, it's maybe been during Ralph Becker's time, that required property owners to have a development plan before they demolished a property. And I'm wondering if that's, I mean, I saw that go awry in my neighborhood because it was clear they never intended to develop the property. They just wanted to demolish the building, and they demolished the building and then sold the property, and it's still a vacant lot. But I'm wondering, is that still in effect? And how would that play in?
It was in effect until I think last year or the year before, and then I think we weren't seeing properties being left vacant, and I think we amended that section to remove that provision. So a demolition before that recent text amendment, when someone applied for a demolition permit, they also had to submit a building permit for reusing that property for anything other than, you know, landscaping. And we eliminated that not too long ago, probably within the last 2 years.
Just because development pressures have gotten to the point that.
Right. And it was too hard to match the timing for the demolition and having the complete development plan.
Okay, so that's not factored.
Yeah, and another piece to it is there was also a bond requirement with that was very difficult to administer, so we just decided to remove that.
Sorry, and are you talking about the demolition if it's in a district, a contributing building or non-contributing building, that fee? For redevelopment
I think at the time I think it was just citywide thought.
Okay.
Yeah, we do still have for landmark sites, right?
Yeah, so in a district, if it's a non-contributing building, there's no redevelopment plan required. But if it's a contributing building, they have to have a new development plan approved before they can get approval for a demolition of a contributing building.
But all of those would require HLC approval.
Demolition of a contributing building requires HLC approval. Demolition of a non-contributing building does not, and does not require a redevelopment plan.
It's not a question, it's just more of a comment. I think this is in the right direction. I think this is a great step in the right direction. I'm troubled by prevention as opposed to punitive after the fact. You know, I'm struggling with everyone that follows the rules. There's rules, and that works. Everything that you're showing here, you know, with the feedback from from us and the Planning Commission, you know, a building was taken down, you know, and collectively the city, we didn't know about it until the building was taken down. Now there's really not anything that can be done about it. So that's where I'm trying to back up to that first step, you know, to prevent that from happening. Because as you said, your own words, you know, once you start partially demolishing and you try to reconstruct it, it's not the same. It's not equal to what it was, even as meticulous as you try to be. So I laud everything that's happened here, that I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm just not certain that it's gone far enough to prevent the kind of deterioration within the district that's still happening.
I'm wondering if we need to develop some kind of preservation neighborhood watch kind of program where like local people kind of keep an eye out on their neighborhood and reporting things going on.
It's Cindy.
Vigilante, yeah.
Maybe we ought to expand it beyond Cindy.
Well, enforcement is just a volunteer thing, right? Isn't it? Well, isn't it? You can call the enforcement office or write a letter to the enforcement office to report. It's reported by the citizens.
We have citizen enforcers, yes, and that is voluntary. Call, report, you see something going on in your neighborhood. But we do have an enforcement division that responds to those complaints. They are not driving the streets of the historic districts looking for these things, but they do follow up on them. And they often are looking for violations specifically in historic districts when they're doing just regular inspections. So they are catching them that way as well. Those aren't demolition violations. Those are just, other types of work without a COA, such as window replacements or those types of things.
I think it's worth mentioning for enforcement purposes that it's not just, seeing that there's a violation and sending a notice. There's a lot of work involved. They do a lot of follow-ups. They do a lot of consultations with, these people that maybe didn't know they were violating the code. So it doesn't seem like an intense work, but it is an intense work getting involved and trying to explain what the path is for them, what they can do, what they cannot do. I see your point of preventing it. I don't know that the solution is having more city employees going out and checking for violations. It should probably be something else.
Well, I'll just mention, I live about a block away from the historic boundaries that we have here. And when I moved to Salt Lake, it just kind of struck me. There's a person that is on an ATV and checks to make certain that the recyclable trash is what it's supposed to be, and drives around and tags them when they're not. And, I'm just thinking that it can't be a tremendous amount of extra burden to have somebody like that if there's a construction vehicle and there's no posting of either demolition or construction, then it just raises a flag. And I guess that's what I'm thinking, that there's some kind of, these aren't, acres and acres and acres. This is a fairly small area. And I think there might be an innovative way of having people, watch the neighborhood so that if indeed they see construction vehicles and there's no posting, it gets tagged. It's just an immediate kind of thing. So that's all I'm saying. To me, it's the prevention. It would be better than the cures that we're trying to enact here.
So I'll make a suggestion as a planning manager now. It might be good to request from us, from the planning division, to look into what kind of notices we could have, and I would try to narrow it down to work that is larger, not just any violation, because, I know the zoning ordinance, and when I'm driving around, I see violations all the time, big and small, and if I were the one calling enforcement for every single one, I would probably be the most hated person in the world. And even Cindy could understand and relate to that, because she does know a lot of the zoning ordinance as well. So it's tricky. But yeah, so I think that's the suggestion. I think maybe unless you have something for this text amendment, maybe suggest something separate that we can work on.
Well, and to me, it does go back to having well-informed and licensed contractors, and licensed architects and developers should be savvy enough if they're if they're real developers, to do their due diligence and realize that, you know, this is part of an overlay district and we have to follow the historic preservation guidelines, let alone just, you know, knowing that you need to have a demolition permit if you're going to demolish a building. Like, that's kind of a basic item when it comes to building to construction. So,
And I agree with you, John, in that, you know, just looking at the photograph, you know, you've got this demolition piece of equipment there that, you know, that contractor ought to have his license taken away. You know, that's and to say, well, I didn't know. Well, that's a part of what you are supposed to know. You know, and so it gets into this. It's two sides. You know, for everyone who follows the rules, it works. Everything we're trying to do here is for people who aren't following the rules, and that's where, you know, if we're going to put teeth to this, let's put some real teeth to it. That the people that are doing the demolition need to pay fines. It's not just the property owner. I think in addition to the property owner, it's the people who are actually doing the demolition or the bad construction that need to be penalized for it, because they ought not to be doing that. That's a part of their professional work.
I agree.
I agree. It's a nice layer for enforcement. It's better than having some kind of system or whenever anyone puts a fence up or rents an outhouse, that some kind of system should inform us that they're going to do some work. But yeah, I agree.
well, does anyone want to propose a motion for a recommendation or not recommendation towards
My
city
sense is
council?
that there seems to be sort of a consensus that we would like to see a little bit stronger measures in what's being done. And then maybe there's some other things that we would like to see explored separately from this particular ordinance. So I guess there's a question of what is it we would recommend be added to strengthen the enforcement in this current proposal, and then maybe a recommendation for exploring other things as well.
Seems like in this current proposal, I think the consensus was 50 years, right, rather than the 25-year. So that's one thing I think we would probably all agree on.
I'll make a motion.
Great, Amanda, take it away.
Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this zoning text amendment to the city council with the caveat that the penalty be 50 years versus 25 years for demolition.
I'll second that.
Okay, great. Alan seconded. Amanda made the motion. Do we have any other discussion prior to voting?
The only comment I would make is that I would suggest, if there is consensus, that we would also include the recommendation that a vacant lot fee be included, similar to a boarded building for any vacant lot that is not redeveloped after unauthorized demolition.
I agree with that.
I see lots of head shaking, so
And I just want to ask a question then. What's the benefit of the additional 25 years?
well, in my view, it imposes that additional cost on the use of the land. In my experience, whenever a building is considered for demolition, whether it's historic or not, it's always based on what the longevity use of the property is going to be. And I have seen, particularly on the East Coast, multiple examples where there was no plan necessarily, but there was a desire to eliminate the cost of having a building that was boarded up or whatever the case might be on the land. And they were perfectly fine to sit on the property for X number of years until they understood what they wanted to do with that, whether it was a sale or a use. I don't think that 25 is long enough, to maximize the encouragement of avoiding demolition. That's, in my view, the primary purpose of the additional 25.
Thank you. So do we want to restate the motion with the stipulations?
Yeah. Let's see. Amanda can state the motion and then we add that as an amendment, or do we just restate the?
I think she could amend her motion, or
Yeah.
we'd have a different motion, right?
What's your preference?
So just for clarification, on the recommendation, we'll have to cost justify that if that motion passes. I'm not sure that we can come up with a specific number today, but if the commission wants to pursue that route, you could ask, in your recommendation to ask council to explore that option. We can look into that and give that information to council if they choose to decide to go that route.
I'd like to amend my emotion. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this zoning text amendment to the city council with a caveat that the penalty be 50 years versus 25 years for unauthorized demolition, and to request that the city council consider a financial penalty in addition to the recommendation of 50 years for inappropriate or unauthorized demolition.
So I think what you're meaning, and correct me if this is incorrect, but we are proposing a monetary fee. So the fee that I think is on the table for discussion is if someone chooses not to reconstruct and they just choose to leave their lot vacant for that 50-year period, then we would explore a fee to charge them for leaving the lot vacant during that 50-year time period.
Okay, I'm going to amend this motion. Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this zoning text amendment to the city council with the caveat that the penalty be 50 years versus 25 years for unauthorized demolition, and that if the property owner chooses not to rebuild the demolished historic structure, that there be a penalty imposed for the vacant lot.
You did it.
Right. I'll second that motion.
Okay, great. Amanda made the motion and Mike seconded. Let's go down the roll here. Adrian,
Aye.
Jared,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Carlton,
Aye.
Amanda,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And with that, that is the end of our agenda tonight. So this meeting is adjourned.